fans realized something was off when Aventer, the wife of Pastor John Gray, recently turned to social media with her eyes full of grief and her voice shaking. Everyone was stunned by what she disclosed next. As new information about John Gay's history came to light, Aventer finally broke down after years of standing up for her husband in issue after controversy. Information that could alter our understanding of their marriage, their ministry, and his reputation as a godly guy. It's more than rumors this time. It's excruciatingly raw, deeper, and more intimate. You're going to hear what may be the most poignant discovery of Pastor John Gay's life, so pay close attention. Pastor John Gray has been one of the most talked about people in the contemporary church world for a long time. Renowned for his eloquent sermons, captivating demeanor, and television celebrity, he established a reputation as a guy who could relate faith to everyday challenges. But there's always another tale going on in the background, behind the ministry, the cameras, and the celebrity ties. A tale of suffering, repentance, and second chances. Now, once more, John Gay's name is in the news, but this time, it's not because he's preaching or spreading optimism. It's on his wife, Aventer Gray, who just went public as disturbing new information about John's history started to come to light. Both believers and detractors have shown sympathy, indignation, and discussion in response to her unfiltered emotion. There's a rising sense that this time, things might be different, and people are questioning what really happened. Why did these past details resurface now? And how is this affecting their marriage and ministry? That something more profound than before is indicated by Aventer's emotional reaction. We're going into great detail about this most recent development in this video. We will examine the reality, the responses, and the lessons that follow, starting with the hidden facets of John Gay's previous scandals and ending with Aventer's emotional disclosure. The connections between this story and past scandals, instances of reconciliation, and the Grays' handling of public scrutiny in the name of forgiveness and religion will astound you. This is where things start to get interesting, though, because John Gray's past is not the only thing that is called into question by the recently released material. Under the strain of public ministry, it calls into question everything we believe to be true about what it means to recover, forgive, and rebuild. Settle in, because we're going to reveal the true tale of Aventer Gay's tragic incident and the reasons it's having such a profound impact on the gospel community and beyond. John Gray was hailed as one of the most talented communicators of his time before the world knew him as the divisive pastor who made headlines for all the wrong reasons. He had modest beginnings, preaching in tiny congregations and relating to people by passion, humor, and openness. He was no ordinary preacher he could be identified with. Unlike most church leaders, he talked about real challenges. Joining Houston, Texas's Lakewood Church, led by Pastor Joel Austin, was John Gray's turning point. He was an associate pastor there, and his fiery sermons and grounded message captivated crowds. He frequently discussed brokenness, grace, and God's capacity to save even the most sinful individuals. He was a darling among younger Christians who felt cut off from traditional church culture because of his charm and candor. Eventually, television networks noticed. Jay got his own show on the Oprah Winfrey Network called The Book of John Gray because of his storytelling skills and contagious charisma. The show depicted him as a guy juggling fame and faith by following his life as a father, husband, and preacher. It presented him as the authentic pastor, the one who acknowledged his imperfections but had a strong love for God. The audiences adored it. However, fissures were starting to appear behind the scenes. Rumors circulated about inappropriate communications and emotional ties with women outside of his marriage. Most initially wrote them off as inflated rumors. Since John Gray was well known for being candid about his personal difficulties, many people believed that openness equated to responsibility. But there were warning indications for those who were listening carefully. Confessions about temptation, brokenness, and the need for forgiveness were common in his sermons. He would lecture about the value of marriage and the need for men to uphold their moral character. Some others saw those sermons as windows into a more profound internal conflict between his humanity and his calling. The first significant controversy quickly surfaced when rumors circulated that John Gray had cheated on his wife, Aventure. Social media erupted. The tale became more convoluted because of how widely known it became. In his sermons, John himself addressed the issue, acknowledging his errors while refuting some assertions. By stating that even pastors are fallible and require God's grace, he presented it as a lesson in redemption. Aventure was by his side the entire time. She publicly defended her husband, claiming it was a spiritual assault intended to ruin their ministry and marriage. While some questioned how much she had to undergo behind closed doors, many praised her loyalty. Her steadfast support at that point became a defining characteristic of her public persona. However, other controversies surfaced over time. The cycle appeared to repeat itself each time: public forgiveness, tears, apologies, and accusations. John kept preaching about grace and redemption throughout it all, while Aventure remained standing next to him. However, some started to question how often forgiveness could mend the same injury. This backstory lays the groundwork for Aventure's eventual emotional collapse. Few people understand the emotional toll that years of constant public humiliation can have on a woman standing in the spotlight next to her husband, even though the world witnessed a marriage that constantly getting back up after falling apart. This is the point at which things become even more intricate, because the most recent disclosure did more than simply rekindle old scars. Even Aventure might not have been ready for the new realities it revealed. It wasn't just another rehashed tale about an old incident when the most recent round of news about Pastor John Gray appeared on social media. This time, new facts came to light that caused additional suffering to a situation that many people thought had already been handled. These new information were more painful than ever for Aventure Gray, the wife who had supported her husband through church gossip, social media scrutiny, and public humiliation. There were communications and exchanges from John's past that had never been made public, according to a number of internet reports and communications that were leaked. These were fragments of a timeline that filled in the blanks from earlier scandals, not entirely new episodes. Voice notes that some say reveal manipulation masquerading as ministry discussion, talks that alluded to emotional infidelity, and photographs that were never completely confirmed but were sufficient to rekindle an old flame. The timing of this revelation was almost as devastating as the information that came to light. The Grays had been trying to restore their reputation for months. John had resumed his preaching, discussing grace, redemption, and the price of failure in an honest manner. He had hosted integrity-related conferences for men, posted about family holidays, and paid heartfelt homage to his wife. The pair appeared to have finally moved past the most difficult period of their marriage to the outside world. However, the illusion of quiet was destroyed when these old data were discovered and started to circulate once more. It was hard to stop the harm once people started sharing screenshots and reviving clips because the internet never forgets. Social internet was inundated with comments. Some supporters supported him by citing verses that speak about second chances and forgiveness. Others were much less forgiving, accusing John of exploiting his faith for publicity and raising concerns about the number of times forgiveness should be given for the same transgression. When Aventure herself made an Instagram live appearance, it was the most devastating moment. She trembled as she tried not to cry, but her tone betrayed the sorrow she was feeling. She talked about perseverance, treachery, and the pressures of being a public wife of a preacher. Even if you love God, you may still be broken. Thousands of women who had been in her position, standing next to someone they loved while silently carrying their own scars, found solace in her comment, "You can pray every day and still feel like your heart is being ripped apart." There was an abundance of support in the comment area. She was referred to as transparent, strong, and courageous. However, there was another reality hidden beneath the sympathy. Her cries made it clear that the mending that many believed had already occurred may not have actually occurred. The genuineness of her feelings was what really astounded the audience. This was not a public relations campaign, nor a practiced church address. It was the unadulterated agony of someone who had pushed herself to the limit. Even when the world turned against John, Aventer had stood up for him for years. She had encouraged women to fight for their marriages and talked about forgiveness and reconciliation. Her tears, however, conveyed a different message at that precise moment, a tale of weariness, disillusionment, and a woman's eventual admission of the costs of her past. John Gray, meanwhile, said very nothing. Instead of immediately issuing a statement, he shared scriptures and succinct thoughts on grace. That quiet spoke a lot to some. Was he sorry? Was he attempting to spare his wife further humiliation? Or was he just, like in the past, waiting for the storm to pass? One thing was certain, regardless of his goals. Everyone, even their fans, was forced to face the unsettling reality of what happens when ministry, marriage, and celebrity collided when these revelations came to light again. A pastor who spoke about redemption but was unable to overcome his past was seen by the world. They also witnessed a wife who had sacrificed everything, faith, love, and loyalty, only to be moved to tears once more by the man she thought had changed. The plot takes an even more unexpected turn at this point, though, because something significant started to occur in the middle of the heartache and public humiliation. The same individuals who had previously condemned the Grays started to utilize their narrative as a prism through which to view their own suffering, strained bonds, and the true price of forgiveness. Social media users' reactions to the news of Aventer Gay's emotional collapse were swift, strong, and sharply split. Videos from her emotional livestream were reposted on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok in a matter of hours. Some people silently observed, taking in the intensity of her suffering. Other people's views were far more strongly held. Some defended her, some criticized her, and many brought up every issue that had ever involved her husband, Pastor John Gray. The comment section soon became battlegrounds. Those that sympathized with Aventer were on one side. They commended her sensitivity for speaking out in public and her strength for supporting her spouse through several storms. These admirers referred to her as the embodiment of grace, a lady who demonstrated forgiveness even in the face of societal demands for vengeance. Scripture passages emphasizing God's mercy and the notion that healing is a journey rather than a single event were shared by them. The detractors, however, who came from both inside and outside the church, asked how much longer she could put up with being publicly humiliated in the name of grace. According to some, she is defending her reputation more than her peace. Others contended that, particularly for women in ministry, being silent for an extended period of time in a toxic environment sent the incorrect message. They claimed that her loyalty had turned into a prison. Aventer's breakdown wasn't only a cry for assistance to many of these critics, it was a woman's realization that love can be too expensive at times. The church community, pastors, ministers, and believers then joined in, each contributing their unique viewpoint to the conversation. Several prominent leaders hurried to defend the Grays, claiming that they were being attacked spiritually. They preached that the enemy works tirelessly to destroy a relationship anytime God raises them for kingdom activity. Others, however, were much harsher, claiming that ongoing crises in leadership are a sign of a lack of genuine accountability and repentance. Grace doesn't mean we ignore the truth. You can't preach deliverance and keep running from discipline. Read a pastor's widely shared message, which received thousands of reactions. The topic was not just within the church. Entertainment and gossip outlets took up the story, framing it as another celebrity pastor scandal. Memes, reaction videos, and commentary pieces flooded the internet, combining serious discourse with sensational headlines. It struck a chord in the faith community, making believers confront a question that many have avoided for years. How far should grace go when it comes to public figures who continue to fall into the same patterns? However, for many viewers, something about this time felt different. A sense of fatigue in the public tone, a sense that people were sick of seeing cycles of scandal, apology, and forgiveness play out repeatedly among prominent pastors. While some clips portrayed Aventer as a symbol of every woman who has ever been forced to remain strong when her heart was breaking, others exaggerated the situation. In the midst of all the controversy, one thing stood out. Is this the cost of being famous in ministry? Are pastors making compromises behind closed doors because of the pressure to maintain an image? And, most importantly, is the church failing its own leaders by elevating charisma over character? Whether or not people agreed with her decision to remain by John's side, they couldn't deny the sincerity in her voice. For a brief moment, she wasn't a public figure or a pastor's wife. Instead, she was a woman whose heart had been broken repeatedly in front of the world, and this time she couldn't hide it any longer. The emotional reaction to Aventur's pain went beyond judgment. Reactions varied even within their own church community. While some relentless church members publicly showed their support by vowing to keep praying for the Greys and their recovery, others discreetly withdrew and refused to participate in or attend services until the situation calmed down. Church leaders were also confronted with challenging questions from the congregation. Throughout it all, John Gray stayed mostly quiet, posting sporadic messages about faith, perseverance, and pain. "God's not done," he wrote in one post, along with a black and white picture of himself gazing off in contemplation. Other questions included transparency, integrity, and whether a pastor's private life disqualifies him from public ministry. Beyond the controversy and discussion, something more profound was taking place, revealing a hidden truth about the modern church. We're frequently more at ease witnessing someone's fall than accompanying them through restoration. The comments on that post were a testament to the division among people, with half of them demanding honesty and the other half offering encouragement. Even as the dust continued to settle, one question remained in the minds of everyone watching. Was this really the breaking point for the Greys, or was it the beginning of another chapter in their story of redemption? As the emotional storm continued to unfold online, it became evident that Aventur Gay's breakdown wasn't just another moment of public vulnerability. Rather, it was a reminder of how easy it is to preach grace, but how difficult it is to actually live it out when the person in question is someone we admired or someone who let us down. Turning point. She had been the silent support system in the background, the faithful companion who smiled through sermons and through suffering. And she had been bearing the burden of standing next to a husband whose ministry had been put to the test by scandal after scandal for years. But this time something changed. Speaking through tears, Aventur's voice trembled as she discussed forgiveness and the kind of pain that comes from not only betrayal, but also from repeatedly trying to heal wounds that keep reopening. You can love somebody and still have to learn how to love yourself again. Her words weren't a prepared defense or a polished sermon, but rather from a woman at her breaking point. Aventur started talking more candidly about the emotional toll of living under constant scrutiny, acknowledging that being a pastor's wife isn't always glamorous and that it can be lonely, exhausting, and at times extremely unfair. Those words struck a deeper chord than any headline because they exposed a reality that many women, particularly those in ministry, have been forced to conceal behind church walls. "People expect you to always be strong," she said, adding, "they expect you to smile through your sadness and pray through your tears. However, there are instances when God must allow you to break in order for you to rebuild." And that's exactly what happened. Aventur gradually regained control of her own story. Her honesty resonated far beyond her church circle, reaching women all over the world who had watched her story unfold and finally saw themselves reflected in her transparency. She began talking directly to women who felt trapped in toxic cycles of emotional pain, reminding them that forgiveness doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. She posted more about being Aventur than she did about being Pastor John Gay's wife. "Healing isn't about pretending it didn't happen," Aventur said in one of her most impactful postings. That one line, which was about survival, faith, and finding meaning beyond suffering, garnered tens of thousands of likes and shares. It's about choosing to develop despite what broke you. One thing was certain though, regardless of what was going on behind the scenes, John Gray's role in her healing was unclear. Some reports claimed he was in counseling, addressing old wounds and patterns that had led to his mistakes, while others said he was concentrating on ministry and attempting to quietly rebuild trust away from the public eye. Her story prompted discussions about what forgiveness actually means, and many in the faith community started to see Aventur as a symbol of perseverance. Not because she stayed, but because she kept finding new strength to stand. Because she was no longer bearing his burden alone and was learning to set boundaries while maintaining her faith. As her healing journey progressed, something extraordinary happened. Rather than avoiding her pain, Aventure began using it to help others heal. She started giving talks at women's conferences, hosting intimate discussions about spiritual restoration and resilience. And it challenged the church to recognize that grace doesn't mean silence and that healing sometimes requires space, honesty, and confrontation with hard truths. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful, she said to women. To demonstrate your strength, you don't need to hide your tears. Her message resonated because it wasn't about perfection but rather about progress, about learning to breathe again when everything seems to be falling apart, and that God can still use your broken pieces to create something beautiful. It remains to be seen whether Aventure and Jay's marriage will fully recover, but one thing is for sure, this chapter has changed her forever. She is no longer just the pastor's wife, she is a voice for everyone who has ever loved deeply, been deeply hurt, and yet chosen to rise. Today, Aventure's journey continues to inspire. She is still standing, still believing, and still fighting for peace. The world may never forget his past, but what he does from now on will determine how the story ends, because, at the end of the day, this isn't just a story about scandal. For John Gray, this is another chance to live up to the sermons he's preached for years about grace, accountability, and change. As the gospel community watches this unfold, one message keeps coming through every corner of the story. It's about redemption, responsibility, and the fact that healing is messy, painful, and necessary. It's about how love can endure truth, and it's about faith remaining strong after the spotlight has faded. Perhaps that's what Aventure was trying to remind us of all along. Forgiveness can change the future, but it doesn't erase the past.